We are so excited to be here today. This is Elijah and Jeanette, talking and bringing you into awareness about what we like to call Goddess Story Time. So, Elijah, go ahead. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I have been so excited for this. So thank you for just being with me on this journey, Jeanette. It is incredibly exciting for me. So yeah, well, first of all, I guess I'll start with what I do professionally. So I'm an intuitive, a Jungian life coach, and a goddess oracle. So primarily what I do is I work with people um, and helping them rise above their story and reclaim depth and meaning in their life,
Mm,
right? If that's kind of the one thing that I have to narrow it down to, it'll be that. And I
I love
utilize
that.
all kinds of tools like divination, and also my relationship with the divine feminine or the great mother. So that's a big part of pretty much everything I do.
I love it. I do. I like how you said that depth, right? Bringing you
Yeah,
into the depth, right? Because that can
yeah,
be a scary place for people to go to.
right,
Not understanding, what that journey really means. Right?
right.
We
So yeah, I think what I'd like to do too is kind of describe a little bit about the road that led me down this path to Goddess,
Yes,
because I
please.
yeah. So in my late teens, I went through what I now call kind of my own mythological
Mhm.
descent.
Okay.
So I was going about, my daily life like we all do,
Mhm.
kind of in that superficial lens or in the mundane. There's nothing wrong with that, but I was just doing life the way a teenager does. All of a sudden, I felt like all of the light from my life was kind of snatched from me.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, I started experiencing panic attacks, social anxiety, depression was a result of those. And so my life became very devoid of meaning. It was very absent from that, from purpose, from any sense of self. And so it was extremely difficult. And I felt probably the way Persephone felt when she was in the underworld,
Mm.
right?
Ooh,
That's
okay.
kind of the way I experienced life for quite a while. But it was in these darker moments that I turned to personal development and
Mhm.
spirituality. So I started because my faith at that point had kind of been really shaken. Um, because when you're going through those sort of things and you're raised in a faith, typically you're just told to kind
Mhm.
of pray it away, right? You're told to pray it away. There's something
Mhm.
wrong with you, and you gotta kind of just get right with God. But
Right.
that wasn't working for me, no matter how much I prayed. And so I had to find my belief in God or
Mhm.
something bigger than myself somewhere else. And so I started exploring. And I remember one time in particular, I was in a pretty deep meditation,
Mhm.
and I had the most beautiful vision of a goddess who kind of embraced me and covered me in
Mhm.
these ginormous wings, and it
Oh,
was profound, the most loving experience that I had ever had at that point. It was like everything I needed to be seen with acceptance,
mhm.
unconditional love. Everything that I needed at that point was given to me with her. And from that moment on, that's really what led me down to curiosity, right?
Mhm.
Like, okay, who was this? And of course, I know this was the great goddess Isis. But it led me to kind of discover more about the goddess, more about
Mhm.
who she is. And if she was this incredible being, why don't more people know about her, and her different
Mhm.
facets? Because over time, now that was one of my earlier experiences, but over time what I found was that there were different kind of archety- archetypal manifestations
Mhm.
or different um manifestations of the goddess that appeared to me at different point in my lives, and that I became to associate with different time periods or seasons of nature. So
Mhm.
I just started to really experience goddess on such profound levels, and I wanted to know why this wasn't, just embraced more, and why didn't more people know about it?
Hmm.
Um, so that's what led me down this path initially, and it was a still an incredible journey of discovery.
I love that. And, you had mentioned two goddesses, right? Persephone. And we'll dig into a little bit about more about Persephone in other episodes.
Yeah.
But that is that, initial descent of going down into the unknown and having faith and not knowing where this is going. But again, it's that faith that
Yeah.
you will come back up again. As
Yeah.
well as Isis, right? An Egyptian goddess. She, is showing that magic, right? Like
Yeah.
that, lighting that spark and that divinity within you. So I love how you brought both of those goddesses in to kind of showcase where you were and now
Yeah.
where you are, right? And where you're heading.
Right. And for me, Isis was such a profound symbol too of rebirth. And
Hmm.
so I didn't know it then, but she was really showing me like what's to come, the
Hmm.
beauty of what's to come. And like you said, the return, right? The
Yes.
return.
Oh,
So now I want to hear all about you and your journey. I know you got
okay.
some things to share.
Well, let's see. My name is Jeanette, and I did label myself Goddess Jeanette Chaky Peters. Right. So I
Hmm.
am a goddess expert, as well as a tarot expert, an astrologer, an intuitive, and um, I was introduced to the goddess culture from a very well, I'd say from a young age. I did go to a traditional Catholic school. I'm going to call it traditional Catholic school because that's what it was, and I had a big affinity for the Divine Mother Mary. And I remember thinking when I was younger I was going to be a nun, right? Because it was easy. It was it felt like home to me, connecting with the
Mhm.
feminine spirit. And
Yeah.
then that did not happen. I got married, have a beautiful family, beautiful children, and the goddess just kept showing up, right, in many, many different forms throughout my young life, until where I am right now. Uh, and she's just been an integral part about showing me how to be, right, more
Mhm.
authentic to who I am. And
Mhm.
my journey with her has been very magical, right, very scary,
Yeah.
but also a lots of love, right? And something that Elijah and I are going to talk about in other episodes are going to be about the divine masculine, right, with the divine feminine.
Mhm.
So when you hear some of these words, and we may jump around a little bit, know that we will come back to these topics. Okay.
Yeah.
So because part of my story is, I I do have a lot of that, more of that masculine energy, right, inside of me. So I can be very driven, and that softness of the feminine was always trying to come out, and I never really allowed it to be at its full potential,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Trying to drive myself into a way of what society would be acceptable, right? Being a woman, right? And again, something else that we'll dive into a little bit further. But over the last few years, with some health challenges and things like that, I realized that to come back into that softness, right? And it's been more of an invitation to dive into my roots of how to become so connected with her, right, with the
Right.
goddess herself, right?
Right.
And we're going to talk a lot about these stories and our experiences as we continue on, but that's just in a nutshell, right? Like we will go into this further, right?
Yeah.
But can I share before we really dive into today is that we pulled a card before we got on,
Yeah.
and the card that I pulled is from this deck. It's called the Gospel of Aradia, and it's from Stacy DeMarco. And the card we pulled was reconciliation.
Mhm.
And as we were reading through this card and these words, it was very strongly apparent, very synchronistic, that we are coming together. And we not only is this meant to help heal the collective, but it's also healing ourselves, right? Coming back into balance and back into harmony.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It was such a perfect card to pull. One of the passages spoke to reconciling two parts that can be in opposition with each other. And in this case, I think that points to the divine feminine and the divine masculine,
Hmm.
right? Because so much of the collective right now is kind of I forget what it's called, but they're
Pendulum,
swinging
right?
the
It's the
pendulum,
pendulum.
yeah. Swinging back and forth, and sometimes we go right over to the extreme masculine,
Yeah.
where we're in that dominator kind of model,
Hmm.
and back to this the feminine. But I think what a lot of the issues today is that we're doing it from a place of the dominator model still,
Yes.
right? So we're
Hmm.
trying to kind of find that balance right now and
Hmm.
reconcile these two incredible forces that exist
Hmm.
within us,
Right.
um, in the cosmos.
Right. Absolutely. Because we both have those qualities within,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm glad you brought, okay, so I found this quote,
Okay.
and it's by Virginia Woolf. And excuse my eyesight, need some glasses here. It talks about the right brain and the left brain. And it says, in each of us, two powers preside, one male, one female. And in the man's brain, the man predominates over the woman. And in the woman's brain, the woman predominates over the man. Okay. So if
Mm,
one is a man, still the woman part of the brain must have effect. And a woman must also have intercourse with a man in her, right? So
mhm.
perhaps, what is meant to be said is that a great mind is androgynous, right? It is
Yeah.
when this fusion takes place that the mind is fully fertilized and uses all of its faculties.
Oh, that's incredible. Where is that from?
So it's from this book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess,
Okay. Okay.
by Leonard Shallon. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced the name. But I ran across this again, synchronistic
Yeah.
moment right before you and I logged on, and I'm like, wow, that is so powerful, right? To
Yeah.
think that we have both of these qualities within us, right? It's not just
Right.
one, and just because you're a man, it doesn't mean that you don't have the feminine. Just because you're a woman, it doesn't mean you don't have the masculine, right? Like they're there.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting because that's so in alignment with what in Jungian psychology they call the anima and the animus. It's basically exactly what you said, right? So the conventional or earlier definition, I should say, was that every male had an inner female, and every female had an inner male called the animus. Um, and of course, we understand that we're kind of limited on language right now, so know
Mhm.
that this has nothing to do with gender, but rather,
Mhm.
I think the more accepted kind of definition of that might be, if you have a masculine persona, then you have
Mhm.
maybe more of the feminine, that is unconscious within you and whatnot. But I just think that's so interesting because it's so in alignment
Yeah.
with some of Jung's ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love your understanding and the way that you talk about you know, these archetypes and this Jungian, background. That it just blows my mind.
It's so fun. Let me tell you, when I discovered the um, specifically the archetypes and kind of how they function, it helped me develop a language that I think is missing within society right now because I
Mm.
think we need a bridge, something
Yeah.
to help us understand a lot of these forces like the goddesses.
Hmm.
But maybe someone might not resonate with the goddess as like a living cosmic being,
Hmm.
right? Because not everyone will. But what if we discussed it as an archetype or a
Hmm.
primordial force and image that exists within all of us, within the collective unconscious of humanity? Right, then it's
Right.
easier to talk about it a bit and understand the patterns of behavior that these goddesses bring up within us. So it's
Hmm.
just a really beautiful way, I think, to kind of bridge a lot of what we're talking about with people who maybe need a little bit more of a psychological understanding, maybe, you
Hmm.
know?
No, I really like that. And I like how you differentiated too. This has nothing to do with gender.
Right, right.
Because that's not what this is about, right? We're
Yeah.
coming to an understanding of just two different energies within our being and how to honor both of them.
Right. And Anne Baring, she talks
Mhm.
about these. I love how she talks about it because she says we have two modes of being within us. We have
Mhm.
lunar consciousness and we have solar consciousness. So, lunar has to do with more of the instinctive, the relational way of knowing, the
Right.
relational way of being in the world, our interconnectedness with nature. while the solar consciousness was more masculine driven, right? It was
Yes.
more of the elements of, I think, of the sun, the archetype of the sun.
Fire.
Yes, exactly. It was fire, passionate,
Mhm.
creative. Um, so I really like how a lot of, I think, our current teachers are starting to
Mhm.
move away from more of the gender terms and
Mhm.
into what they actually are, which
Right.
are forces that exist within all of us, regardless of our gender.
Right. I agree with that. And, and part of the work with astrology that I do is I think of things as like soul and spirit. So not to go down the astrology rabbit hole. Um,
Please do.
not right. When I said I had a lot of masculine energy in me, it's my natal chart. I've got a lot of air and fire, right? And those are traditional elements that are more in alignment with that spirited energy. So it is, it takes on more of that quality of being more driven, right? And then the lunar qualities, the soulful qualities always are to me, when I'm working with this, are more related to the yin, right? Where the spirited
Mhm.
and the spirit is for the yang, right? Yang. I probably going to mispronounce that, so I do apologize. But is the water and the earth. That's more yin. That's more
Mhm.
soulful, right? So
Yeah.
a good way to look too at like what you're doing is, start to learn your astrology chart a little bit. And then you can see like
Yeah.
where some of these things are coming up for you, right? Learn where your Venus
Right.
is, where your Mars is. Again, we're not going down astrology a rabbit hole, but just a thought, right? Because what we
Yeah.
really want to do today is talk about the history, right? And
Right.
briefly, like, and we're inviting everybody to do their research on this topic and understand it, but just kind of go over the start of where things started and where things
Right.
shifted and where we are now and how to come back to a space where we can embrace all, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you mind if I start us off on that little segue then? Because I think
Please,
that's
please,
perfect.
please. Yes.
Okay. So it is incredibly fascinating to really look at the history of what happened to the sacred feminine,
Hmm.
because what we know now is that we can actually trace the goddess culture all the way back to the cultures of the Paleolithic
Hmm.
era and the Neolithic era. So the Paleolithic ended, I think, approximately around 25,000 years ago. So it was quite a bit ago, and the Neolithic a little over 10,000.
Yeah.
So what happened though was that Marija Gimbutas, a Lithuanian
Mm, love her.
archaeologist, she is incredible, but she discovered in one of these eras, the Neolithic era, I believe, um, the civilization of Old Europe. That's what she called them. And so she argues that this culture was primarily goddess based because
Mhm.
there were a lot of these figurines. I believe they're called Venus figurines, right,
The
Jeanette? That
Venus
they,
of Waldorf. Ooh, really bad at
yeah,
remembering that. Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
right. So they found lots of these figurines all throughout
Mhm.
prehistoric Europe. The thing is that a lot of the earlier archaeologists and anthropologists were primarily male. So
Mhm.
the initial interpretations were that these were simply sex objects or
Mhm.
tangible manifestations of the male imagination. Now we can look at that and
Yeah.
say, probably not the best interpretation, and that was
Right.
probably through a specific lens. But Maria Gimbutas and all these other incredible archaeologists and
Mhm.
anthropologists were going back over these findings, and they were saying, no, there's actually so much
Mhm.
rich history here. You know, Maria, she went through burial sites. She looked at
Mhm.
the art, and as you know, art is an incredible way that we see what a culture finds important, right? What they
Mhm.
depict in art is very special to them. So it's also important that we see what they don't depict and what they
Mhm.
don't portray. And so in lots of these artworks, there was no portrayal of war, of
Mhm.
conflict, or any sort of hierarchy,
Mhm.
right? Most of these things that we know today in the patriarchal world that we live in were absent from that time period. So
Mhm.
it's so Marie Higginbutas, again, that's the name you want to dive into if you want to go even deeper with this. But she was kind of one of the leading archaeologists that showed us um how far back the goddess culture actually went.
Mhm.
Do you have anything to add on that part? Because I think it's so fascinating.
Oh, it is hugely fascinating, to me. And you'll start to see that a lot of the shifts that started to change, with the goddess culture is when, our cultural in general, started to become more of, sedentary, right? Like we made little villages, right?
Yeah.
We didn't have to move anymore, right? To go find food. We just started, like started with agriculture, right? And then you start to see
Yeah.
the shift begin to change of no longer more goddess oriented, but starting to get in with more of that, more God oriented, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
that's
when the balance started to shift a little bit, because when you had the goddess culture beginning, there was more of a balance, right? There was a scale there,
yeah.
right? Because
Right.
it wasn't one was better than the other. It was like we had to work together in order to survive.
Oh, this is such a great point. So
Yeah.
I'd like to also add on to that, because there is a well, for one, Anne Baring, she talks again, she gives the stages of evolution names. So earlier
Mm-hmm.
within that goddess culture, we were in the primary lunar era, where
Mm-hmm.
most of our mythologies and interest were based around the our fascination with the moon.
Yeah, the cycles of the stars too, right?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
exactly, exactly. So, and then we have the solar era, which is what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
when the fascination moved to the sun and the mythologies of the hero. But
Mm-hmm.
it served a purpose.
Yes.
And the lunar era was about being in relation to each other, a part of the tribe and a part of
Mm-hmm.
nature. But in the solar era, we needed an emergence of the ego, of the conscious
Mm-hmm.
ego. And so that's what I guess you can say the overarching purpose was that to give
Right.
a deeper sense of individuality from us and
Mm-hmm.
start to separate us from the tribe a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's really fascinating because Rianne Eisler,
Mm-hmm.
she notes, and we'll go over just let's make a note to go over all these names and books
All
at
these
the
names
end.
and books, yeah, because
Yeah.
she did the Chalice and the Blade.
She
Rihanna
did the
Iceland, yeah,
Chalice
she
and
did.
the Blade.
Yes.
And what happened, and I want to share this because there's some incredible evidence that's
Mm-hmm.
come out recently to support lots of these findings. But what happened was that there were three successful incursions by Kurgan tribes. So these
Mm-hmm.
were more of the patriarchal people that ended up wiping out the earlier goddess culture.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in the fifth millennia BCE. But I just found this out not too long ago that in 2018, there were actually findings that support Maria Gimbutas's
Mm-hmm.
kind of theories, because initially archaeologists, they weren't down with what she was saying, right?
Yeah.
They weren't,
It wasn't their jam.
it wasn't their jam, but they discovered that there was actually differences in the DNA from
Mm-hmm.
people of old Europe and the tribes that ended up invading them and wiping them
Mm-hmm.
out. So that was an incredible contribution. And now lots of people are kind of calling for people to reconsider
Mm-hmm.
what the messages that she brought forth, and even put her back to her place as one of the most incredible archaeologists of the
Mm-hmm.
21st century, right?
Yeah.
Or 20th century. Um, so it's, yeah, but again, what I want to note is exactly what you said, Jeanette, that there was kind of an overarching purpose for this still,
Mm-hmm.
even with those disparities. They
Mm-hmm.
served as different points of our evolution
Right.
to further
Like, right. Because
within.
you have to have stepping stones, right? In
Exactly.
order to um move forward as a society.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Um, I wanted to talk about too the the split that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important that we go over this
Mm-hmm.
because of how drastic it changed the worldview and how we perceive each other, and why the great goddess
Mm-hmm.
isn't really talked about anymore, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's just the point, is that she was suppressed
Mm-hmm.
and her voice was kind of taken or suppressed.
Yes.
So Anne Baring, the historian, she notes that in 621 BCE, a group of a priesthood ended up taking over one of the earlier temples of Jerusalem. So in this temple of Jerusalem, it's really incredible, but basically Yahweh was worshipped alongside the goddess Asherah, and she was seen as divine wisdom. She was the Holy Spirit. And this priesthood didn't like that. So
Yeah.
they didn't like it. And so they ended up throwing out the images and the artifacts that were sacred to her, such as the bronze serpents. They butchered her trees, and they then created the myth of the fall, which we know as Adam and Eve. And they demoted Asherah, the mother of all living, to the mortal Eve, who is now known as the mother of all living. And within this myth, we also see the blame placed on the woman, right, Jeanette? Or the blame was placed
Yep.
on the woman.
We are
And
wicked.
exactly. Women are wicked. They're not to be trusted. And they are the reason we were banished from the Garden of Eve. So the extreme worldview changed because we had, in those previous cultures, seen the earth as sacred, seen each other as sacred. Male and female were lived in harmony in an egalitarian society.
Right.
But now, because there was such an impact with this myth, that, and also because there were sacred symbols of the goddess that were now put in that myth, and they were demonized. You know, the tree, the serpents, all of these previous images that we knew to be symbols of the great goddess's power were now to be feared, blamed, and the reason we were exiled to Earth, which was no longer sacred. It was a prison. Right? So I wanted to bring that up because this was a very dominant myth that shaped Western civilization. I'm pretty sure we've all heard it. And it spread, and there's lots of myths like this that also portray kind of that split from the great mother to now we have the great father, right? Is there anything you would like to add on to that?
Yes. So I love everything that you have just said, right? Because you do find that throughout history in many different cultures that there is a story similar to this, right? About this great fall, about this descent. And, now that you're talking about this, we have the Sumerian goddess Inanna, right? Who is going into the underworld, right? Like she's going down in there to and it's kind of like that's the descent, like that, that story, that mythology, and we'll go over that in a little bit more detail, but it's like that's what this feels like, is like now the woman is being pushed down into, this place of supposedly no return, and right, death and destruction. But what I do want to say is that as the world starts growing and emerging, and there's this idea too that once the written language was started, right, that with the written language was also another way that the goddess culture was wiped out, because if you don't teach certain people how to read and you're the one writing the stories, right, then what do you think happens? Right. Only certain people start to hear these things, and then you have them saying, well, this is wrong, right? This wasn't, this shouldn't be. So then you start to see that the other temples of the goddesses start to get torn down. Right. And, a lot of different religious things have happened over the centuries too that have, pushed that out as well. Right. So let's be clear. Religion, right, in its sense, can be very man-made, right? I'm going to step on some toes with that right now, right? But there's a difference between religion and spirituality, right? And with the goddess culture, we are talking about a spiritual experience here. It's not religion, because religion is man-made.
And it is so a part of us. I don't think people really understand that. It's been suppressed,
Hmm.
but it is so natural. You know, the goddess is a part of everyone.
Hmm.
And and this is usually what I kind of define the goddess or the sacred feminine as now, is this force that connects us to each other and nature in
Yeah.
such a profound and deep level,
Yeah.
you know, from love and compassion. So I love that you brought that up, and maybe we can talk a little bit now about, okay, why are we talking about this? You
Right.
know, why
Right.
are we bringing up the history, and why are we talking about the sacred feminine? Do you want?
Absolutely. And like I had this quote and I
Okay.
had pulled it up and now I need to find it again because now it is gone. So hold on just a second.
Right.
um, so one of my favorite books of all time is written by Marion Zimmer Bradley. And she she wrote the book The Myths of Avalon, which is on the Arthurian legend. And she talks about the goddess culture and how it kind of fizzles out in that era and it's replaced by Mother Mary. But the reason I'm bringing her up is because she has this quote and it's called, "I have called on the goddess and found her within myself."
Mm.
And I
Oh,
thought that was a really beautiful quote. Um,
yeah.
as well as, Starhawk, right? Starhawk wrote a wonderful book. And one of the quotes that, was in this book was, "Through the goddess, we can discover our strength, enlighten
Mm.
our minds, own our bodies, and celebrate our emotions."
Mm. Oh, that's beautiful.
Right. So again, we can put some, some of these book recommendations, underneath the video.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you said that, because what it brings up for me is the the myth of Oshun. The myth of
Mm,
Oshun. So I think this is kind of the perfect metaphoric portrayal of why we need the sacred
right.
feminine. So for the oh, were
Well,
you gonna say?
before you can I just say before you start, because I want to make this clear too, is that we're going to be talking about goddesses from all different cultures. Okay. And I think this is important to note that we've come to this point in our society recently where we don't want to give away our heritage, right? Because through certain events that are horrific, right? We want to also honor everybody's understanding of their spiritual connection, but we will be talking about different goddesses from all over the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think
And
it's important to notice that the goddess is multifaceted, and
yeah.
she's going to show up to you in the way that you know is going to relate to you, right? And how you're going to understand her. So I've got a strong connection with a lot of goddesses from India, right?
Right.
And from the Roman era, as well as the Norse,
Yeah,
right? And
right, right.
and I'm learning more about the goddess culture from Africa and from some of the South American indigenous
Mhm.
regions. So just making it clear again, we're not discriminating. The goddess doesn't discriminate. We're just showing through a different lens, right? From a lens that
Right,
maybe will sing to your soul, right?
right.
Yeah.
And we're doing it with that respect, with
Hmm.
that reverence, because the goddess, again, like you said, she's multifaceted.
Hmm.
And I think what we want to do is we want to bring together everyone,
Hmm.
who wants to explore their relationship to goddess, and we do that by including different stories, different
Hmm.
mythologies in the most respectful manner, so that we can see who kind of resonates for us and what their stories speak to us archetypally,
Right. And that's
right?
exactly why we're doing this, right? These story
Yeah,
times is to
yeah,
bring you more into harmony with that.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now
So
that I
that
got us off track, and let's
yeah,
talk about
no,
the
that was
beautiful
perfect.
Oshun.
Yes. So Oshun and the myth of Oshun, there's a creation story that stems from the Yoruba tradition. I believe, I hope I said it right. But basically, these beautiful people believed that the primary creator sent down 17 orishas to kind of enliven and bring life to the earth. Oshun was included in those 17, but she was the only female. And so, you know, you have all these boys that are doing their thing, and bottom line is that they couldn't do what needed to be done to bring life to the earth, you know, and they couldn't create or sustain. So they were like, oh, you know, we're gonna need Oshun's help over here. And so they did. They kind of I don't know what the word would be, but it's kind of like when you try to convince someone, right? And that's what they were
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
with her. And she did. She brought forth her sweet, beautiful waters, her sweet honey that she's known for, and she was able to bring life to the earth, to enlighten it, to bring again life, later
sweetness.
human life, sweetness, and
Yeah.
other species. And so they needed her. And I think that's so perfect to kind of convey what we're trying to show, is that we need the feminine and the sacred feminine to bring back that sweetness to life. Because I think um in our capacity and in our way of favoring the intellect in this kind of era that we're in, we've sacrificed the capacity to
Yes.
feel deeply, right? And to be in love with life in a way where it is sacred and it is
Right.
numinate.
To be in
So,
devotion, right? To be in
yeah,
devotion. And
exactly.
not just to ourselves, but to all of our relationships.
No, yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Because in earlier cultures, everything was seen as sacred, right? The earth, each other, we were all part of a sacred cosmic order. But within the later kind of advancements, we've sacrificed that. But what we're moving into, and this is why me and Jeanette are doing this, the whole bigger picture of it is that we want to unite these two kind of polarities, right? One of the philosophers that coined the term original participation, which was during the lunar era, that was um, symbolized by our relationship to nature. He also talks about final participation, or what Anne Baring calls the stellar era, which is what we're moving into,
I was
which
just
is,
going to ask you, right,
yeah,
about that. Like, because we had the
yeah,
lunar, the solar, the stellar. That
yes,
to me is like star,
yeah, right, right.
right?
So it's the union, it's the remembrance of the sacred feminine, and knowing that we don't have to go back to those times, but that we bring it in with what we know now, and we merge it with the divine masculine, because I think that's something that's been missing, is how we can bring these two to a sacred marriage, right?
Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do. So I think this is a really great time where we can talk then about the story of Artemis and Apollo, and then make that like wrap this episode. And
Yeah.
then the next one, we take out some more juiciness.
Okay. Yes.
What do
I
you
love
think?
this. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Do you want to
Okay.
start?
With Artemis.
Yeah,
So,
would you like to start? Because I know you have a really beautiful history with her.
right. So Artemis is a Greek goddess. And her counterpart in the Roman pantheon, Parthenon, I'm going to get that screwed up and I apologize, is Diana. Okay. So Diana is my girl. I love her. You know, she's very sacred to me for many different reasons. And maybe let me share this story. And then we'll talk about the history, because now this is coming up and I find this to be a very interesting experience. So, all right, Diana showed up to me many years ago in a dream, and asked, me to, I don't want to say like pay homage, but she had messages for me, right? So,
Mhm.
kind of just asked for that, understanding, that reverence, and for me to welcome her in. I think that's what I really want to say, is like she wanted to be welcomed into my life. Um, and she's all about focus, right? She's about
Yeah.
focus, and she's a protector, and she's a fierce protector of women.
Right. Yeah.
And she is what you would consider a virgin goddess, right? And the term virgin, right, doesn't mean it's not somebody who has never been intimate with anybody, but it is more along the lines of she is not owned by anybody.
Yes.
And
Yes.
So, like think about it in that aspect, like that the term virgin has been just like, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know what to call it over the years, right? But it really is like a woman who is not, owned by a man,
That is, yes.
right?
So juicy, so juicy.
Right?
And oh, go ahead,
No,
sorry.
no, 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 that's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead, say it.
Okay, because the reason why I love talking about Artemis,
Mhm.
in particular is because she embraces the sacred feminine in such a multifaceted way. She represents the feminine in such a multifaceted way. I think over here in our kind of Western civilization, we've attributed certain traits to the feminine, certain traits to the masculine, and then we
Mhm.
call it a day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Nah,
But I
that's that. Nah.
right, that's
Right?
that, and this is that, and there's not really any sort of union or any sort
Yeah.
of yeah. So, but here's the thing about Artemis. She was known as goddess of the hunt.
Mhm.
So she was the wild woman archetype, essentially. Like you said, she was fierce. She was a
Mhm.
protector of women. She's one of the few goddesses in mythology that actually go out of their way to save her own mother, for one. She saved
Mhm.
her own mother on multiple accounts from rape and harm.
Mhm.
And she's protected other women from similar situations. So we also know her to be that fierce component,
Mhm.
right? And it's actually really scary to offend Artemis because we've seen what happens in mythologies when that's happened. She
Right.
gets her revenge.
Yes, she does. She will turn you into an animal.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I was going to talk about that story, but we'll
Right.
get into that in another one.
Yeah.
Um, but
So
bottom line is,
yeah, so let's talk about Artemis then and her coming into birth, like the Greek, right? The
yes.
Greek Artemis. So
Yes.
go ahead, talk about your story because I love it. And I love
Yeah.
hearing you talk about it.
So Artemis, her and her twin brother Apollo, they were the offspring of Zeus and Leto, I believe is
Hmm.
how you pronounce it, the goddess Leto. And when Artemis was born, it is said that she sprang right to action to
Hmm.
assist her mother in birthing Apollo because she was
Hmm.
having complications. So
Yeah.
then she became known as goddess of childbirth, to
Yes.
assist during that. But the bottom line is that her archetypal energies were so multifaceted. She was not only goddess of the hunt and the
Hmm.
wilderness and the undomesticated, but she was goddess of the moon. She was
Hmm.
goddess of the irrational and the intuitive aspects of life. The
Yeah.
things that we only maybe are illuminated during the night.
Hmm.
And so she really portrays the feminine where I think we can acknowledge that it's not just one thing,
Yeah.
right? You can be a variety of different kind of traits and still be feminine. I think
Hmm.
that's what Artemis teaches us, to not be
Absolutely.
ashamed of the maybe
The
um
fierceness that
yes, of the
she
fierceness.
expresses. Hmm.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I'll briefly talk about Apollo. Apollo's not getting the spotlight, sorry. But
No pun
but
intended, since he's the god of the sun.
right, right.
Yeah.
No, but he was known as God of the Sun, and he was associated with the rational, the sciences, or
Mhm.
the things that we see within the light of day. Um, but we also knew him for music, for
Mhm.
dance, for creativity. And there were temples all throughout Greece where his oracles at Delphi would actually channel divine guidance from him.
Mhm.
So even within the masculine, there was a component of intuition,
Yeah.
of the irrational. So what these beautiful mythological figures and archetypes show us is that even though we may have the realms that we have dominion over,
Mhm.
we can still experience and have the capacity to experience other modes of being. We are not limited to simply one thing or one
Right.
way, right? And I think
Absolutely.
they show that so beautifully, which is why I love talking about them. And they're
Mhm.
twins.
Mhm.
So that's right, they're twins. They're one and the
Right.
same.
yin and yang, right?
Yes, exactly. Lunar and solar.
Right. And then, like you said, within each is an essence of the other.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So
Yes.
within me, in this form that I am right now, there is that essence of the masculine. And within you, in the form you are in, there is that essence of the feminine.
Right. Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And then, you know, bringing them together, it's like, we could do this alone, but why do this alone when you're much better when you're together
Yeah.
and more
Right. We
in
bring
balance when you're together?
exactly. Exactly. And we bring different perspectives, and
Mhm.
we offer our own unique gifts, to the cause.
Yeah. And experiences too.
Yeah.
Right? Which are other things that, you know, we'd like to delve deeper into with this topic,
Right.
right? The goddess
Right.
story time. Um, yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that is wonderful, right? Thus far in this journey that you and I have been on today with all of you.
Yes. Yes. That was
And I
so
like
fun.
to say, you know, like any comments, any feedback, you know, are always appreciated. You know,
Mhm.
this is where we're at in our journey at this present moment in time, talking, you know, from the experience that we know, right? In this present moment in time, there's always room to know more, to learn more.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and again, we are human. We are not perfect. Our pronunciations, our ideas, they're unique to us.
Oh, oh yeah. I love that you said that. And let me just be the first to say, I'm a reader. So
Yeah.
I rarely hear the words like reflected back to me. I just go on what I've been pronouncing them by in my mind, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Then
Exactly.
often I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure that was so wrong.
Yeah. 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 I'm sure we could talk a lot about that.
Right.
But I know that we do appreciate each and every one of you.
Yeah.
And Elijah, I
And
appreciate you, and I can't wait to continue to
yeah,
go down this path with you and uncover more and discuss more on this
right.
topic.
Right. And just to end on another note, again, this is inclusive. We want this to be for everyone. This isn't about gender identification,
Mm-mm.
anything like that. If you are drawn to Goddess to explore her mythologies, to see how she is active within you, then you are welcomed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, do it. Just
Yes.
do it. That's my
Just
Nike.
do it like
That's my
Nike.
Nike pun for today. There you go. Just do it. Okay. I'm
Oh, I
ridiculous.
love it.
But we thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.